So, The Mandalorian Grogu is finally here, marking Star Wars' return to theaters after the Rise of Skywalker. And honestly, I walked out feeling completely underwhelmed. Not angry, not shocked, just confused. Because for the movie that was supposed to bring Star Wars back to the big screen, this felt weirdly small, safe, and unfinished. When Lucasfilm first announced a Mandalorian movie, the hype made sense. Din Djarin and Grogu became the face of modern Star Wars. Even after the disaster of Mandalorian Season 3, people still cared about these characters. The audience connection was there. But the second the movie was announced, one question kept repeating in my head, something I rarely think. Why? And to be fair, Star Wars has surprised me before. I remember thinking Andor sounded unnecessary, and that turned into one of the best things Star Wars has ever made. Period. So I went into this film hoping it would justify its existence. Maybe it would tighten up the franchise. Maybe it would finally push Star Wars forward again. Instead, it feels like Disney looked at the Grogu merchandise sales and reverse engineered a movie around that. The entire thing feels creatively manufactured. It constantly reaches for galaxy-level stakes while forgetting what made The Mandalorian work in the first place. Simple storytelling, grounded character moments, and the Western-style atmosphere. You can practically feel the plot being stitched together scene by scene, instead of folding naturally. Now, to give credit where it's due, this is absolutely not the worst Star Wars movie ever made. It is not as messy as The Rise of Skywalker, and it is way more watchable than The Book of Boba Fett. In fact, the first half genuinely works. Watching Din Djarin and Grogu hunt down Imperial remnants, track down Rotta, and bounce between missions actually feels like classic Mandalorian. For a while, I stopped thinking about all the franchise baggage and just enjoyed being back in this world. And honestly, Rotta ended up being one of the biggest surprises in the movie. The fact he is voiced by Jeremy Allen White is still hilarious to me.
Get the fuck off my expo chef now!
But the character actually works. Why? Because instead of turning him into another Jabba clone, the movie makes him into someone trying to escape the legacy entirely. No forced twist, no secret villain reveal, just a character who genuinely wants to become better than the world he came from. It's one of the few ideas in the film that actually feels fresh. The score is also fantastic. Ludwig Göransson absolutely carries parts of this movie. Some of the planetary themes have this retro sci-fi, almost video game inspired sound that gives the film actual personality. And every time the classic Mandalorian theme kicks in, it still hits. The music honestly does a lot of heavy lifting once the movie starts falling apart, because eventually it does fall apart. And this is where I think the bigger problem with modern Star Wars comes in. I genuinely believe Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni used to understand this universe better than anyone. Clone Wars, Rebels, the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian, they proved they could evolve Star Wars while respecting it. But after the Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, and Mandalorian Season 3, something changed. The storytelling started feeling repetitive, safe, and directionless. And this movie completely confirmed those fears for me. The biggest issue is the structure. The first half feels like the best episodes of The Mandalorian. The second half feels like the worst ones. Once the Rotta storyline wraps up, the movie completely loses all of its momentum. Suddenly, it turns into disconnected side quests, awkward comedy, and scenes that feel ripped straight out of a Disney Plus filler episode. It genuinely feels like a television season stretched into a feature-length film, and the pacing collapses because of it. Then there are the visuals. And look, I'm not one of those people who complains that everything is CGI every time a blockbuster comes out. Even the brain-dead criticisms around color grading, both of those get exaggerated constantly. But for a Star Wars movie with this budget, The Mandalorian and Grogu looks shockingly cheap. Nearly every scene feels trapped inside the volume. The lighting looks artificial, environments feel flat, and nothing has that cinematic scale Star Wars used to have. Half the time, Din Djarin doesn't even feel physically present in the world. It feels like a stunt double wandering through a giant LED screen. Say what you will about the sequel trilogy, but those movies at least looked expensive. This doesn't. It looks hollow. The character writing also feels completely stuck in place. The movie keeps hinting that Din Djarin needs to let Grogu go and move on emotionally, except they already reset that arc in Season 3, so now the film is repeating developments that already happened. Again! And Grogu himself barely functions as a character anymore. He exists to be cute, sell merchandise, and get audience reactions. There's even a section where he's separated from Mando, and it should have been a major turning point. But it's dragged out and weirdly lifeless. At this point, Grogu feels less like a character, more like a corporate branding. Even the supporting cast feels barely checked in. Sigourney Weaver shows up and completely disappears from your memory the second she leaves the screen. There's even an alien voiced by Martin Scorsese. Yes, Martin Scorsese, an alien who helps Mando out earlier in the film. He is clearly there for the paycheck, and I don't blame him. And yes, there are scenes where Dave Filoni gives himself these dramatic reaction shots that the film treats like massive lore reveals. It's unintentionally hilarious. The villains are even worse. The Twin Hutts have zero presence, zero intimidation, and barely any effect on the story. They throw in Embo purely for fan service, but he contributes almost nothing. And the main antagonist, Janu Coin, I think I pronounced that right, is so forgettable that by the time the final act happens, there is no emotional weight at all. A Star Wars movie lives or dies by its villains, and somehow this movie gave us 3 of the weakest ones at the same time. The action eventually falls apart as well. Early on, there are glimpses of solid cinematography and fun set pieces, but by the end, everything feels weightless. Space battles look unfinished, fight scenes have no impact, and the editing drains tension out of every major moment. The craziest part is this movie reportedly spent 2 years in post-production, and it still looks rushed. And by the time the credits rolled, nothing has changed. Din and Grogu end the movie exactly where they started, flying towards another adventure. No major growth, no real consequences, no reason this story needed to exist as a theatrical film. And that's the biggest problem. I almost never walk out of movies questioning why they were made. But this genuinely feels like a TV storyline turned into a movie because Disney needed another Star Wars release. What makes it more frustrating is that it's not terrible, it's just aggressively fine. And fine is not what Star Wars needed after years away from theaters. At 2 hours long, the movie slowly drains away your patience because you realize it has nothing meaningful to say. It plays everything as safely as possible. No risks, no ambition, no real evolution. That's what disappoints me the most about modern Star Wars. I don't want to be safe anymore. I want this franchise to actually move forward again while respecting the foundation George Lucas built. Explore the Old Republic, jump hundreds of years into the future, do something bold. Anything. Instead, after all this time away from theaters, Disney brought Star Wars back with what is basically an extended Disney Plus episode. And that is so disappointing. I genuinely hate that I'm being so negative about The Mandalorian Grogu because honestly, I wanted this movie to prove me wrong. I went in expecting a mess, hoping I'd be surprised. And instead, it delivered exactly what I feared. And to me, that says a lot about the current state of Star Wars. If this is the direction Lucasfilm is heading with Dave Filoni leading the creative side, then yeah, I am way more skeptical about the future than I used to be. What makes this even worse is that this was supposed to be the first Star Wars movie in 7 years. That is insane to think about, especially when the next film, Starfighter, actually sounds fresh and exciting. A post-Rise of Skywalker story with brand new characters and a more Spielberg-inspired adventure vibe? That sounds exactly like what Star Wars needs right now. But The Mandalorian Grogu feels like the exact opposite of that. Safe, small, and weirdly uninspired. And unfortunately, the movie did end up being pretty much everything I expected it to be. Even with a strong start, this film convinced me that the story of The Mandalorian has completely run out of steam. The movie feels empty, the visuals are surprisingly weak, the character writing barely works, the action is forgettable, and the plot feels less like a real theatrical event and more like an extended 2-hour Disney Plus episode. And while I still don't think it's the worst Star Wars movie ever made, The Rise of Skywalker still easily holds that title for me. This is by far the most bland and painfully average Star Wars movie Disney has released so far. So I'm gonna give The Mandalorian Grogu a 4 out of 10.